12:53 here in Washington, D.C., and I wanted to talk about some events happened in the last 24 hours, primarily which is the bombing of Syria and the military target that the Biden administration, the United States of America, bombed last evening on Thursday, January 25th. So I want to talk for a few minutes about that this morning and how this is just a continuation of what our nation has pretty much always done. But before I begin, as I always do, I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you this afternoon from what's now known as Washington, D.C., and that these are the lands of the Piscataway. And I want to honor and thank the Piscataway for their stewardship of these lands. And I want to state how humbled I am to have an opportunity to be living on these lands. So, my Piscataway relatives, thank you for your stewardship of these lands. Right, there's been a lot that's been going on this week. I did do a live stream earlier in the week on Monday, I believe, and I spent most of Tuesday and Wednesday kind of watching and thinking through Congresswoman Deb Hollands' confirmation hearings to become Secretary of the Interior. And I have a lot of thoughts about this, and I'm going to be sharing those at some point. I thought I was going to talk about them today, but then with the bombing that happened yesterday, I decided I want to talk about that today instead. And so I will address my thoughts and my feelings on Congresswoman Holland's confirmation hearing and what kind of took place there. But I was thrilled when I watched it on Tuesday morning that she began with a traditional introduction. She began with an acknowledgement to her ancestors and to her relatives, and she began with a land acknowledgement to the Native nations here in the East Coast, especially around the Washington, D.C. area. And it was very honoring and humbling to see her make those acknowledgements, and I was thrilled to see that. So, Congresswoman Holland, thank you for your leadership and for your modeling of what a true leader of Turtle Island looks like. There also came out a letter later this week, in the middle of the week, by a group of evangelicals, and it was denouncing white nationalism. And I was going to actually address that today too, and talk about how both in our political system as well as in our churches, we do not do a good job of decentering white landowning men. And so we denounce the low-hanging fruit, but we don't talk about the underlying worldviews that are much more implicit and much more just part of everyone's worldview and part of the things that we accept, part of the status quo. And so while it's good to denounce the explicit, violent, low-hanging fruit, we really need to work harder to address the implicit racial biases that are actually held by a majority of Americans. And again, I was going to talk about these things today, and then with the bombing that President Biden ordered yesterday of the military target in Syria of a militia that was backed by Iran. And then that took place yesterday evening around 6 o'clock. And then, of course, the news was dominated by it both yesterday evening and this morning. And I have some thoughts on this. And first of all, we all should have been expecting this, right? If we go back the last 5 presidents, it was June 26 in 1993 when Bill Clinton had his first military strike in the first half year of his presidency with a strike against Iraq and in Baghdad. It was on February 16th of 2001, again, just a little over a month, less than a month into his first year in office, that George Bush also did a bombing raid in Iraq. It was literally 3 days into office, on January 23rd in 2009, that President Obama ordered his first attack and drone and bombing in Pakistan. And it was on January 29th in 2017 that President Trump ordered a raid in Yemen that resulted in the killing of people, including civilians. And then it was on February 25th of 2021 that Joe Biden bombed some targets in Syria. And one of the things, of course, when especially in 2017, when Donald Trump did his first raid, there was a lot of uproar about it and about all of his raids, including I said several things as well, of the way he used the military throughout his term in office. And when I listened to the news reports about Joe Biden today, one of the things that people said was, well, he did a very proportional response, and he did it in a way to de-escalate the situation and not exacerbate it. And there actually was a lot of praise about the way he conducted the strike, and it noted that he chose one of the least aggressive or the smallest targets that he could have attacked. Yeah, there was a lot of affirmation, I would say, for his strike. But we can't forget, right? It was literally a year ago, just over a year ago, that we assassinated an Iranian military leader. And we cannot act like this was merely just a defensive move because of some bombings that took place in Iraq against some of our contractors and even some of our soldiers and soldiers of our partners in that area. But right, we assassinated an Iranian leader a year ago. And so we are not just kind of helpless victims. We're without any sort of skin in this game or even blame to take. And military assassinations are illegal, or political assassinations are illegal, right? They're not what civil nations do. They're what nations of terror do. And we assassinated a military leader from Iran a year ago. And so when we say that Joe Biden acted to de-escalate the situation, I don't fully think that's true. While he may have been a bit more concerned about diplomacy with Iraq and trying to give them some space, we still bombed another country, right? To get at targets from another from supporters of another country outside of those borders. And again, if that had happened on these lands, on our lands, or even on any of our colonized lands, there would have been a massive uproar. But we think we did this, and we say, oh, look what great restraint we showed, that we bombed a third country and caused death and damage in that country. And yet, where's this great restraint? And so we just need to point out that this is just a continuation of what the United States of America does. And what this initiation process we seem to have for so many of our new presidents, where just a few days, even a few weeks into their first terms in office, we seem to challenge them or present them with opportunities to use our military. And it seems like many of them jump at the opportunity. And there was another interesting story that came out today. And I was listening to the news. One of the podcasts I listen to is called 5 Things by the USA Today podcast network. And they did a story about, they mentioned in their podcast a story they actually had on their website, which is the story titled "A Reckoning is Near. America has a vast overseas military empire, and does it still need it?" I'm going to share that story in this in the stream here, the chat here of this live stream. And I invite you to read it, because in there they talk about the vast military empire and the fact that we have a $700 billion military budget, which is greater than the military budgets of 10 other nations combined. They talked about the fact that we have 800 military bases with hundreds of thousands of people serving on foreign soil. And that contrasts with China, who has 1, and UK, France, and Russia, who have a combined total of less than 60. And we have more than 800. And so our military footprint is massive around the world. right? And it reminded me of an article I wrote in 2017 and a critique I had back in 2017 regarding America's greatness, right? If you remember in the 2016 election, we were having the debate on what was it, what did it mean to be great? If Donald Trump wanted to make America great again, and Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and others were adamant that America is already great, I decided to do an analysis and try to figure out, well, when our leaders say great, what do they mean? When Donald Trump wants to make America great again, what does he mean? When Hillary Clinton says America's great already, what does she mean? And so I wrote an article basically, and I did some research and I put it into my presentations where I was what I call decoding America's greatness. And I'll share that article in here. I published it on Indian Z. I also did several lectures on it. And in that piece, I went through what does it mean to be great. So great is when you're head and shoulders, you're far above, you exceed expectations in so many different levels. And Americans, right, we love to think we're great at things like education. We think we're great at education, but if you actually compare our students globally, we're middle of the road. We have some great institutions here, but our students are middle of the road, and we are kind of in the middle of the testing of any global metrics. We love to think we're great at healthcare, right? And we have some of the best hospitals in the world. But our healthcare system is a shambles, and our delivery of that healthcare is horrible. Racial, economic, gender biases galore. We have this great system, but we hoard it, and we do not make it accessible to very many people, including our own citizens. So we're not great at education. We're not great at healthcare. People think, well, we're great at democracy, right? Well, 3 of our last 5 presidents, I believe, were elected by, even though they lost the electoral college, or they lost the popular vote, and yet they still became our president. And if you think our democracy is great, look what happened just literally in this last year, right? Where we had this massive fraudulent claims of voter fraud and a literal insurrection at our Capitol. I think there's a lot of things Americans have to learn about democracy. Freedom, right? People think we're great at freedom in the United States. We always say how all these countries are jealous of us because of all of our freedoms. Dwight Eisenhower said, if you want to be secure, go to prison. You're clothed, you're fed, you're given basic health care. The only thing you're lacking is freedom. So the way you take freedom away from a free nation is you incarcerate them. And we have the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world. We suck at freedom, right? We suck at freedom. We take it away more than any other nation in the world. And especially BIPOC, Black, Native, Latinx, people of color. Incarcerate them at 3 to 5 times the rate we incarcerate white people. So if we're not great at education, we're not great at healthcare, we're not great at democracy, we're not great at freedom, where are we great? Where are we head and shoulders above the rest of the world? Military spending. Again, we spend more in a single year than 10 other countries combined. Military bases on foreign soil. Again, USA Today, we have over 800. China, the UK, Russia, France have a combined total of less than 60. Income inequality. We have one of the highest rates of income inequality of any country in the world. Consumption of renewable resources. We are 1/5 of the world's population, and we consume 25% of the world's renewable resources. Incarceration of people of color. Again, we have the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world. The things we are great at, the things that we are a head and shoulders above all the other nations at, are all components of colonialism. This is where we're truly great. This is where America's greatness shines more than any other nation in the history of the world, is in our colonialism. So in 2016, Donald Trump was running to make America colonial again. And Hillary Clinton was pretty adamant, as well as President Obama. America is already colonial. America's greatness lies in our colonialism, our ability to colonize the world, both our allies and our foes. And so yesterday, when President Biden, less than 6 weeks into his presidency, bombed a target in another nation, he demonstrated what every single president in the past several decades have demonstrated, which is they are eager to get behind the greatest military in the history of the world and express these colonial desires. And Joe Biden sought to reassure our nation that America, by the definition of Donald Trump, is still great. We are still colonial. That has not changed. The military-industrial complex is a vast colonial enterprise that spans every continent and has its footprint in almost over 100 nations. And Joe Biden demonstrated less than 6 weeks into his office, and that enterprise demands to be fed, right? It demands to be fed, not only with money, but with conflict, with war. And Joe Biden demonstrated he is more than willing to comply. He is more than willing to feed that beast. He is more than willing to express America's true greatness, which is colonization. It was a very disappointing day. Not one that was unexpected, right? I've said this from the beginning. Joe Biden promised he was going to maintain the status quo. He promised he would have a bit better temperament than Donald Trump, but he still holds the same values. And that's what's happened, right? And it's really interesting that Joe Biden has had a hand in, I don't want to say introducing, in bringing leaders of color into this colonial mindset, right? He was President Obama's vice president. 3 days into his presidency, he began an attack in Pakistan. He went on to the normalization of drone bombings and killings by President Obama. There will be books, volumes written about that in the decades and years to come. And now, Vice President Harris is being introduced to how to use this military-industrial complex. There's a lot of danger in the way that, because we insist on keeping white landowning men centered in our politics, in our military, in our foreign policies, our domestic policies, that so much of what their role is to basically bring those from the margins into that worldview and into that mindset. And so this is one of the challenges that we face. And again, I'm very disappointed in Joe Biden. it's not that I'm surprised by this. I completely expected he would be doing these things, and he's doing what he promised he would do. He's doing it with a better temperament, but he is absolutely reinforcing the status quo. He's absolutely working to keep these things at play the way they've been for the past 250 years. Someone commented when I tweeted this morning, or I forget if it was Facebook or Twitter, but someone asked the other day if I might be able to be more positive. And it seems like I'm always critiquing things and I'm always being negative. And I acknowledge that I actually appreciated that comment, because it reminded me that of the two things that I need to keep in mind at all times. One of the reasons I continue to critique, and I'm doing it so frequently, is because our nation, right? We didn't vote for change. We voted to get Donald Trump out of office, but we didn't vote to change anything. We overwhelmingly elected a man who absolutely promised to return us to the status quo. And the status quo has never worked here in the United States, ever, except for white landowning men. And so part of this next 4 years is a period of lament, right? It's just acknowledging that we decided as a nation. Yes, we voted individually and we backed different candidates, and a lot of people even voted for me. But corporately, as a nation, we voted for a white landowning male from the 1% who promised to return us back to the status quo. And the status quo is based on racism, sexism, white supremacy. Well, he didn't say who was going to make America great again. He said he was going to restore the soul of our nation, right? Which is colonialism. And he's absolutely doing that. And so there's a part of this time, this is a period of lament. This is a period of lament. And I think you've been hearing me lament a lot more and critique a lot more, because these are very challenging times. But I also don't want to get lost in the fact of only being negative. And one of the things I want to start doing, I realize I haven't done this in a long time. I've talked in the past about how when I was living on the reservation, waking up every morning and watching the sunrise was one of the most important disciplines, spiritual, mental, psychological, physical disciplines I think I've ever had in my life. Or for over a decade, I woke up 4 to 6 mornings a week, and I greeted the morning sunrise with my prayers. And the perspective that gave me on the world was so unbelievably positive and healthy. And since moving to DC and living in a concrete jungle where there's no tall hills and it's hard to see the horizon, I have not been watching the sunrise nearly as consistently, and especially now in the past year where I don't even travel. And I'm here in my home every day. And so one of my commitments, I just was thinking about this week, is I want to start at least once a week getting out and watching the sunrise, waking up early and going out. I need to find a good place in DC where I can go. I haven't found one yet, but I want to find a good place in DC where I can go and watch the sunrise and remind myself every morning, or at least one morning a week at least, of what a blessing it is just to be alive. What a gift it is that we have been given a new day. And I want to begin to share that with people. And I want to even to invite you into that process alongside of me, because I will be doing a lot of critiquing in the next 3 to 4 years. And I'll be pointing out a lot of the things that are challenging and not going the right way in our country. But I don't want my message to be only negative. And so I'm going to try to reestablish this discipline. Maybe again, because I have to go quite a distance, I'll probably go once a week. And I do have other patterns in my life where we try to remind ourselves, right? I've shared this before, that every evening at dinner, our family goes around the dinner table and we all name at least one thing from that day that we're thankful for. And that's been a very healthy discipline. We've had that discipline in our family for decades. And just doing that discipline has been very healing and restorative, especially during this pandemic, to force ourselves to think of something that we're grateful for, that we're thankful for, and to name it out loud and physically. And so I do have some of these patterns in my life, but I've been recognizing, and that comment reminded me that a lot of these things don't come into my live streams. So I forget who made that comment, but I appreciate that challenge. I want you to know I am lamenting and I will critique, because we made some very tough choices. And now we have to deal with them for the next 4 years. But I also want to make sure that we remain healthy, and that we remember that, yes, life is a gift and we need to steward that gift well. And I want to find ways to invite people into that better and in a more healthy way. So yeah, my relatives, thank you for your comments. Thank you for the emails and the ways you reach out to me. I am deeply grateful for the platform that I've been given, and I'm grateful for the opportunity we have to talk and share about these things. Last week Friday, I did a Q&A for my book on selling truths, and that went really well. We had about 50 people sign up and had almost an hour of really good dialogue. We're going to do one again next week, next Friday, and my co-author, Soong-Chan Ra, is going to join me. We're going to schedule it for an hour and a half. It's going to be at 3 o'clock on next Friday. So not today, but next Friday. What's that? March 5th, I think. I forget the exact date, but next Friday. And we'll do it for an hour and a half. I will get the sign up for that up on our social media in the next day or two. And if you want to get a copy of the book, you can go to my website. You can also, I'll put a copy to the link where you can order a signed copy of the book on Settling Truths. And I'm going to try to take at least once a week, hopefully, where I talk about this book and share about this book, because there's so many things that are going on today that the book addresses, that I want to continue to use it as a conversation piece to move the dialogue forward and to move things forward in a healthy way. So, yeah, thank you, my relatives. It's been a very busy week. We passed a milestone of 500,000 deaths due to COVID-19. And we have to acknowledge that we are in a severe place of grief and even trauma. And we're not even at the end yet, right? We still have months left of wearing masks and social distancing as we continue to try to get the vaccine out and get our citizens and our people, not just in our country, but globally, vaccinated and protected from this virus. We still need to make sure that we care for the most vulnerable in our communities. We still need to make sure that we remain diligent in respecting life by protecting our health and the health of those around us. And so I want to encourage you. I know it's hard to continue to wear masks, continue the social distancing, get the vaccine when you have an opportunity, when your turn comes up in line. And let's continue these next few months making sure that we have as few loss of life as possible. I know states are beginning to open up. They have this tendency when they see numbers go down to open things back up. And I know that is needed in some senses for our economy, but it's when they open back up that the infection rates go back up. And so we're not at a herd immunity yet. And while our numbers are going down, that's good, but it means we have to be diligent to continue to do the things that keep our numbers low. And right now, what's having the greatest effect on keeping our numbers low is social distancing and wearing masks. So, yeah, please continue to walk in beauty, my relatives. And let's learn how to walk in beauty together. Ahiahat, hakonet. I look forward to talking to you again soon. On Sunday, I'm going to try to do a live stream where I talk about decolonizing faith, and we'll do some teaching on the difference between power and authority. Even looking at some passages in the book of the Gospel of Mark, and how the church widely misinterprets what it means to have the ability to act, and the way they use oppressive worldly power instead of the use of authority. But so I'll announce that later, what time we'll be doing that, but I'm hoping to do that sometime Sunday morning. But yeah. All right, my relatives, I could keep talking, but we need to get other stuff going. So walk in beauty, and we learn how to walk in beauty together. Hakonet.